My name is Phil. I'm a former Jehovah's Witness. I've attended at least 4 congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses in my past: York Clifton, York Acomb, York Heworth and Leeds Hunslet, all in the UK in the Yorkshire region. And in each of these congregations I was subjected to discrimination and hate crime, as well as many violations of confidentiality, and I'm currently being silenced, shunned by every one of them. I'm also being treated as collateral damage by a watchtower, as I'm an embarrassing scandal that they want to cover up indefinitely. I'm here to tell my story to everyone around the world, JWs and general public alike. Why? Because it is what the watchtower don't want me to do. Because I know the truth about the truth. My name is Phil, and this is my dramatic exit story. Well, I was raised in the Heworth Hills in North Yorkshire and attended a Church of England school in a village called Hovingham. Eventually, my dad's work brought us to the city of York. And you probably know that it is quite a famous city for its large cathedral, York Minster, the castle ruins, as well as the medieval city walls. Well, so back in the 1980s, 2 pioneer sisters, so-called, began having a Bible study with my mum. At this time, I was at school, secondary school. I had the hair, acne and everything, as well as looking good in a school uniform. I was quite a hard worker at the time, as I also had 3 paper rounds, a morning round, an evening round and a Sunday morning round. I was probably the only kid at school paying for his own school lunch. Anyway, my mum cancelled the study with the 2 sisters, and I think it didn't really marry up with her existing beliefs, such as going to heaven when you die and so-called. She was also into spiritism, astrology and fortune telling, and obviously Jehovah's Witnesses condemned this practice. So she told them that she made a bit of an excuse really. She told that my dad wasn't happy about the study and that she had to stop. But in reality, my dad didn't even know about it. You know, he had no idea that it was taking place. Well, I used to join in at times with my own sort of schoolboyish ideas that you have in those years, fantasizing, I guess. I don't really remember that much about it now, but when the study had finished, one of the same sisters kept bringing the magazines, the Watchtower, as well as the Awake magazines, which went on for some time, well, for decades, in fact, until we asked to be and do not call. I don't think we particularly read them, more just like used them to line the hamster cage with. Well, at secondary school, I was given a Gideon's New Testament, which is kind of like a little red book. I think it was the King James version. All the kids were given one at school. It was a small book with a red cover, and I read this like every night before going to sleep. And sort of going back a step, during junior school, I was literally pushed through a door into joining the school choir, and we practiced this on a weekly basis at lunchtimes. But going back even further, I attended the Church of England school I mentioned while living in Hovingham, as well as later Weststow for 2 years before coming to York. And this exposed me to mainstream Christianity, really. After my mum stopped her study, I was praying for what I called at the time the right religion. Sort of weirdly, one night I dreamt about what I thought at the time was a vision of the Rock Church in York. And to be honest, I thought it had something to do with kind of rock music with maybe a twist of Christianity. That's how I saw it at that time. So I eventually phoned them up to see if I could go. But being a bit shy in those days, I kind of cycled there, but felt too apprehensive in going in. Anyways, the two Jehovah's Witnesses kept coming over with the magazines. And one day when they came, I asked if I could go to their meetings. And without sort of further ado, I was invited to the public talk and study, while unbeknown to me, sort of coerced into having a Bible study too, although I was never asked. These sort of studies I had with the husbands of the two sisters, who called on my mum. So the knowledge book had just sort of come out at that time, and I was considered kind of like a guinea pig or a test. But prior to this, I'd written to Gideons to thank them for the New Testament that I was given at school. They kind of wrote back and suggested that I prayed for forgiveness for my sins. And I did, in fact. But, I had at that time something else that was really, really bothering me. And of course, that, for my teens, I was sort of struggling with my sexual preferences. But in honesty, I was a little discriminatory, I suppose, myself in terms of, I really wanted sort of to get married and kind of have a family of my own, sort of do what I considered to be the normal thing to do, when you're at that age and you've got your whole future ahead of you, then these are the sort of things that you kind of think about. But obviously I prayed and I prayed and prayed and for that to be put right. But, little did I know, owing to what information I had available at the time, the Watchtower's belief was that we are not born this way. It is a lifestyle choice, that we can remedy it ourselves. Well, it's absolutely ludicrous, really, as well as narrow-minded. They don't know for sure why some people have a same-sex attraction. They're not psychologists, biologists, scientists, yet they kind of make this short-sighted assumption that one can simply change their sexual preferences. As sure as I'm saying this today, I doubt they'll be able to change theirs, at a whim. I mean, could you? It would be very difficult, if not an impossible thing to do. You can't. Well, although information was limited at that time, there was only kind of a couple of awake articles and sort of a young people asked book that sort of touched on the topic, as far as I remember. But I soon learned in sort of my Bible study that having kind of same-sex relationships was considered wrong. My reasoning at the time, throughout my interim as a Jehovah's Witness, was that, we're born imperfect and, issues such as this, would be remedied in the new system. I just had to kind of like sit tight and wait patiently. That's the way I kind of saw it. Oh yeah, I did. I mean, I prayed about it regularly and tried to conquer it myself, I guess. But indeed, as you would expect, nothing worthwhile came of it. It's just simply an impossible thing for a human being to do. Literally impossible.
But like I've been telling others, and this is a fact, the homosexuals that are designing these clothes, they like you in tight pants. That's who likes it, not spiritual people. So just something to consider with dress and grooming. Is it appropriate? Is it modest? Does it display soundness of mind? If not, do something about it.
The first way you can do this is by avoiding tight-fitting clothes that can identify you with homosexuality. What kind of clothes are we talking about? Some outfits are designed to feminize a man's appearance, as homosexuals try to do, especially displaying the buttocks and genitals. Why? Because it makes it harder to tell the difference between a homosexual and a heterosexual man, making homosexuals blend in.
Well, to be honest, being 51, I'm a bit old-fashioned and I like regular-fitting stuff anyway. I doubt I'd even get into a pair of tight-fitting jeans or trousers anymore, no more than Anthony Morris could. If I tried walking sort of in tight-fitting clothes, the fiction would probably cause a fire. pretty angry, very angry, to be honest. In fact, disgusted, to insist that tight-fitting clothes is by design of homosexuals is discrimination, plain old discrimination. He has absolutely no idea, who it was who, produced these figure-hugging clothing. He's a liar, basically. I mean, it could have been a woman or even a heterosexual male, I mean, the idea these days is if you've got it, flaunt it. So heterosexual men probably want to show off their figure more than women do these days. I mean, you couldn't say that, women's tight jeans or lycra shorts are designed by heterosexuals, could you? I mean, maybe it was, I don't know. But it was, I think it was a very, very reckless thing for him to say and to talk about even. The trouble is, people who assume that he is God's spokesman sort of believe him, and obviously mud sticks. But what made it worse for me, was a few years later, he was caught out purchasing a massive quantity of high-value whiskey and filling his car boot with it. And I realised how hypocritical he was being, because he was pointing the finger at others while he had a clear issue with alcohol. Gluttony as well, probably. And, he was insisting that JW children put their pocket money in the contribution box, while he was making expensive purchases. I mean, shame on him. Shame on him. Well, how it happened was that I approached an elder in my congregation who I thought that I could trust. And he later became a circuit overseer, I believe. Now, being manipulated into believing that I could change my preferences, I explained everything to him. And this wasn't an easy thing to do. I felt very embarrassed, kind of exposed, especially when sort of Watchtower considers it to be a bad thing. Yet at the same time, the magazine articles kind of reflected that one could change, and this was what I pinned my hopes on. However, I was never given the chance to change. In fact, after this conversation, I was never given any more assistance with the issue. And we never met again, and not with another elder in any other congregation about this issue. Well, something else that was going on at the time, it was a bit strange really, was a couple that had moved in to the congregation from Pickering, and they had been drifting from congregation to congregation in different parts of the country to escape creditors chasing them for money. Unfortunately for me, they moved in down my street and gave me kind of lifts to the meetings, because I didn't drive myself then. They initially stayed at a brother and sister's house before getting a place of their own. They said that they couldn't work owing to health issues, but he was very work shy, to be honest. He also made a sister feel very uncomfortable when they stayed at her house, because he had gone up behind her while she was washing up and putting his arms around her. It was all very odd, really, and he took up a better way around, where you would sell on doorsteps using kind of like catalogues. This is back in the 90s. And I also took this up on a part-time basis. But he didn't pay me for the sales that I made. And obviously I was quite upset about this. And one time he created a scene with me at the literature desk in the Kingdom Hall, because he claimed that I'd pushed in. But as it happens, the guy on the literature counter told me to go and help myself if I wanted some tracts, which is what I was doing. And he grabbed hold of me, and I told him to get off. I turned around and escaped through the fire exit, got on my bike and went home. So anyway, the elders sort of did nothing about this guy. In fact, when I complained about him, they made me feel as if I was in the wrong, for complaining, and that I had to do better in the future. And this is because he had sort of made good friends really with one of the elders in the congregation called Martin. He had a kind of a ridiculous moustache at the time. I always remember that. They eventually had to move away again as their creditors sort of caught up with them. But as far as I understand it, in the next congregation that he went to, he got disfellowshipped, and some have said that he even ended up in prison, although I don't have anything to sort of verify that. But what I do know to be true is that they separated, this couple, and she claimed that she no longer had the same illnesses that she had owing to the stress that she was enduring being sort of married to him. Well, sort of going back to my issue, the elders, instead of providing assistance, they became very homophobic. I therefore changed congregation and went to another one nearby in the same city. And I largely enjoyed it until one day a sister with a problem child in the congregation accused me of having sex with her daughter. And so what had happened was the then child texted me for us to meet up so that she could share her problems with me that she was going through. Now, considering myself kind of spiritually mature at the time, I met her in a public place, which was kind of like a balcony overlooking the river in the city of York that has a couple of kind of outside eateries where you can dine on the sort of balcony. So it was a public place and it was quite busy. It was a Saturday afternoon. And then we went to McDonald's afterwards. Now, as I mentioned, it was a Saturday afternoon, and York gets extremely busy with day trippers, as well as tourist visitors, as well as locals as well. Now, CSA was well wrapped up in those days before the internet kind of got developed. So I had absolutely no idea what was going on behind closed doors in the organisation. Nobody did, really, at that time. But on accusation, she said that a sister had seen me with her, and that I had apparently had sex with her. So I asked for the sister's name. She wouldn't give it. So on one hand, I had elders condemning me for my actual sexual preferences, while at the same time, a woman in a congregation was accusing me of having sex with her daughter. So no good deed goes unpunished, as they say. But on top of this, I was also counselled for telling someone who had grabbed me in the Kingdom Hall to get off, and I escaped through the fire exit, as I mentioned. So being so distraught with things, I had a long spell of being inactive that went on for some time. My confidence in the elders was at an all-time low. But which is kind of interesting that I'm saying that, because it even got worse, as time went on, because they just didn't marry up with what I've been told to expect from them. Well, actually, no, I didn't. I still believed what I believed, and still lived in harmony with what I was taught by Jehovah's Witnesses. I still went through the motions, even though I wasn't actually attending meetings. You see, despite not being in a congregation, I was still very heavily indoctrinated at that time, brainwashed, you could say. And I had sort of no resource really for deprogramming at that time. Sort of therapy and mental health was kind of a taboo subject, unlike today where it's a little bit more talked about, more open. Now, I was still a practicing JW, just this time with a full-time job. To be honest, I was starting to feel a bit depressed with it all. It affected my kind of mental health, even though I didn't always recognise it. Sometimes the symptoms just became the norm, and I kind of got used to it, but it all stemmed to this discrimination really that I endured, and this actually got a lot worse owing to future events that followed. Yeah, I mean, we had the awful events in sort of New York with the Twin Towers, which were pretty shocking. And I don't think that there's anyone who doesn't remember where they were and what they were doing that day, when the reports came through. I mean, I had a full-time job at Network Rail at the time as a data analyst. And at that time, the sister was still handling my mum, my mum's mags. And one day our paths crossed again. And I started attending the now sort of defunct book study that was situated in a a brother and sister's home. And I went for a while, but not attend Kingdom Hall meetings. And I wasn't really sort of ready for that then, even though it was on my mind. And when I stopped going, for some reason, I can't remember why now, perhaps I just lost interest or didn't feel part of it somehow. I wasn't made to feel part of it. But as the years passed, the London bombings came along, and this triggered something in me, actually. I actually, on this occasion, went back to York Clifton congregation eventually, and they had just sort of studied the Watchtower study on the prodigal, receiving back a prodigal with open arms, and with excitement. Now, I thought that after the meeting, people would come up to me and talk to me and sort of welcome me, but instead, not one person approached me, not at all, and I ended up going home feeling very deflated. I did, to be honest. I still carried on going to meetings. The process at that time for someone who had been inactive was that he or she would have to have another Bible study with preferably the elders, or at the very least with a pioneer. Now, because of the elders' homophobia, I was literally passed on to a pioneer who was from South Africa, and it was the same elder, again, Martin, who approached me with this. Feeling put out, I said that I didn't need a study. I told him that I'd been studying on my own, basically going through the teach book. And I haven't spoken to him since, and neither do I want to. As far as I'm concerned, he's a hypocrite. But well, they all are, really, to be honest. Now, I think I'd hit the nail on the head, really, when I said that I'd been studying on my own. I realised that the only person I could count upon to take care of my spirituality was myself, my own endeavours. There was no kind of spiritual support for me, really, and there still hasn't been up until this day. In fact, quite the opposite. I was fighting a one-man war, really, as far as spiritual apathy was concerned. It just wasn't supposed to be this way. So you get told that the elders are there to help, they have your back, as it were. They have gifts in men, they care about your spirituality. But I later found out, really, that it was just the complete reverse. You will have to look after yourself, fend for yourself, all because of, well, homophobia, really. They didn't realise that they were breaking the law, even, with hate crime and discrimination, because it is against the UK law. But obviously the worst was still yet to come by this time. So something else that happened at this time was my book study overseer approached me for a shepherding call. He told me that everyone in the book study group was having one. But as it turned out, after asking others in the group about it, sort of inquiring with them, it apparently was just me who was getting a shepherding call. And I was asked some very sort of probing questions, although my memory of them is sketchy, so I don't want to sort of go into too much detail because I sort of feel, I've been sort of dishonest by getting it wrong. But I remember feeling lied to, owing to being told that the entire group was getting one. I felt that I was being targeted by the elders. And I just wanted to basically sit in the meetings, really, and just be educated this time. I didn't really want anything else. And having said this, I was attending a weekly field service group like every Thursday, as it was my day off on a Thursday. And the days of sort of recording field service hours were applicable. And I was filling out a field service form and submitting it on a monthly basis. But I found out later on that my field service hours, even though I'd been recording them on a monthly basis, had not been recorded by the congregation secretary in York Clifton congregation. No, I was never told that they weren't being recorded by any elder any time. I just saw it as homophobic, really. It was hate crime. I was being victimised because of homophobic elders basically in the congregation. And it wasn't just one or two, it was the majority of them. And it turned out to be in several congregations as well. The reason I found out about this was because I was that distraught. I changed congregations again to another congregation in York. This time I went to York Acomb on St. Stephen's Road. And it wasn't until I was called into the back room by the elders in York Acomb congregation, when I just moved in, I discovered that my field service time had been ignored because they were quizzing me where my record cards were. And I told them which congregation I'd previously been in, and they later told me that my record cards had been lost. So one former elder told me that, well, why didn't they just create new cards? And, and he couldn't understand why that hadn't happened. Because it wasn't this incident alone, really. There were other things that occurred back in York Clifton congregation that suggested sort of discrimination, such as having my Bible study passed to a pioneer, for example, as well as being soft shunned by people as well. I believe so, although I never saw them. They would have needed to, well, I wanted to be a regular pioneer for some time, so I asked for a form and applied, and a service committee was formed, and I was accepted. But not all the elders in the congregation agreed with each other, because some of them bullied me out of the congregation at a later date. I was the last to know that I had been accepted as a pioneer as well, because the service overseer came to my home to tell me that there was a pioneer meeting with a circuit overseer. And I told him that I didn't even know that I'd been accepted as a pioneer. No one had told me, and it turned out that the people who were homophobic deliberately didn't tell me. And he said to me that, he told me that it was just expected that I would know. So, and this was a sign, obviously, that not all elders were happy about me pioneering. So it was January, and at the time it was quite unusual because we had a great deal of snow that month. So I went straight out in thick snow, basically, with which was unusual weather for York, because as we're quite low down, we don't get snow very, very much. And so in my first month, I did 84 hours, even though it had been snowing like most days. Well, the following month there was a Kingdom Hall maintenance day, and I was working part-time in a trade decorator's store, Dulux, and I was working that particular Saturday morning with the intention of sort of going straight to the Kingdom Hall afterwards. Now, don't believe for a moment that there isn't a gossip mill in the organisation, something that the Bible condemns anyway. But in pursuit of these lost cards, it transpired that the elders in Clifton had revealed my sexual orientation to the elders in my new congregation. Well, I received a text message from a sister who said that one of the elders had discussed something in the Kingdom Hall car park, this is prior to me arriving, to other members of the congregation about my personal circumstances. And when I asked what, she was reluctant to tell me, and she said that she would sort it out herself. And I was actually begging by text for her to tell me, but she wouldn't. And she was very kind of earnest about it. Yeah, well, I was devastated. You can imagine, really. I felt embarrassed, angry, that my privacy was shattered to pieces. I never expected to have that broadcast by the so-called kind, caring spiritual shepherds. I wanted it secret. I wanted it confidential. It was my problem. It was my right to privacy. But I never knew that the so-called gifts in men included a loose tongue. Hence why I don't feel ashamed about revealing my story to everybody now. So I went to see another elder who I placed trust in and told him, as well as showed him the text messages from the sister. And this elder, who at the time I trusted to act righteously, as it were, I was so naive in those days, he actually covered it up and made it appear that it was the sister who was lying. I bet she was making it up. So kind of unwittingly suggesting that, she was guilty of slander, really. Well, it was trying to push, really, that I should be, it was trying to encourage me to forgive and forget and not to pursue it any further, which is kind of, for me now, looking back, is obviously, I understand why he did that now, in order to sort of deflate it before it got out of hand. But he got found out for covering it up. But although at that particular time, I didn't know the full nature of what had taken place, you just assume that the elder is right and trustworthy, one of God's, elders, you don't question it. So I believed him because, you're taught to trust these individuals. But obviously some time had passed, and then I realised that it wasn't the sister who was committing slander at all. It was a cover-up. So also, slander is obviously a very serious sin, and she'd never been reproved. It would have been announced from the platform. She might even have been disfellowshipped. The elder who revealed my confidential circumstances actually told me that she had been in the back room a few times to try and throw me off the scent, and this was while I was working with him in the ministry that he actually mentioned this. But I think he was trying to shift the blame onto her. So I didn't reveal to anybody what had actually taken place. And I realised that he had just dropped himself in it because he'd just told me something confidential about another person in the congregation. And he even told me about things that had happened in the elders' meetings and in that same morning on the work with him. And I later found out that she'd never been in the back room at all from another elder. So one night, the situation got the better of me, and it really played on me for a while. And I cycled up to the elder's house, who covered up for the elder who violated confidentiality. I was quite a cyclist at that time, and I knocked on the door quite abruptly because obviously I was pretty upset. But he and his wife pretended to be out. I knew they were both in, and his and his wife's car were parked outside, and a light was on inside. Now, after knocking a second time, and he purposely didn't answer, I was just so frustrated that I pulled the wire on his doorbell, which didn't work anyway. It had never worked all the time of knowing them, actually. Not my finest hour, I grant you, but, obviously I was very upset about the situation, and it was obviously compounded with him sort of pretending to be out. But another one of the elders, who was an electrician in a congregation, he repaired his doorbell the following day. Now, the sad thing is that a day or two later, a policewoman came round, and she told me that if I went round again, that I would be arrested. Now, I told her that I was being bullied and harassed and discriminated against, in which she said that I had to phone the police and report it. However, obviously I decided not to because, well, after all, I pulled a wire out of his bell. So after this incident, obviously I didn't go back to the meetings, but I kept up my field service on my own and generated a great deal of sort of back calls at this time as a pioneer. And believe it or not, from building up my hours prior to becoming a pioneer, I was attending around 30 calls at that time. And I also had 2 hotel reception routes, which I was doing, and got being a sort of a tourist city, there's quite a lot of hotels in York. But about a week or two later, a further elder phoned me up and arranged a meeting with himself and another elder in my sort of book study group, and I met up with them in the car. Now, when I met them, not only was I challenged about the doorbell, but they also insinuated that I damaged the wing mirror of the elder's car. Now, I told them that I'd not touched his wing mirror, and this is true. I've never touched his wing mirror. However, the two elders sort of took the side of the elder who had made this claim, even though there weren't sort of two witnesses or any shred of evidence, really. Now one of these elders was the then congregation secretary. Now, at a later date, I saw the elder in his car in Clementhorpe when I was doing my calls, and I noted that there wasn't any damage to his wing mirror whatsoever. I couldn't see anything. And afterwards, I started attending the meetings again, but the secretary said that he and the other elder would have to meet with me again. Now, I politely declined, obviously, as you would, but the secretary was very abrupt with me, and he kind of forced me into meeting up. And basically, I was just being, harassed so much that I was literally being forced out of the congregation because of my sexual orientation. Well, shortly afterwards, it was time for the circuit overseer's visit again, and I received a call from the elder who came around to tell me about the Pioneers meeting. He was the service overseer at the time. He asked me to come and meet with him and to discuss my concerns with him and the CO. So I thought, oh, great, well, I'll be able to kind of vent off, my concerns, Now, I met with them in the Kingdom Hall, and I was illegally locked inside. In the UK, locking someone in a room is known as false imprisonment, and it's considered a crime, quite a serious crime, actually. I was told that they locked the door to prevent anyone coming in and overhearing a confidential matter. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I now realised it was to prevent anybody overhearing the conversation about what had happened, obviously, in the Kingdom Hall car park, about maintenance day. Because if it got out, it would have caused chaos, and also how it was kind of subsequently covered up as well. If people would have found out it had been covered up, obviously, that would have a detrimental effect on the congregation, as it were. Now, I was challenged quite rudely by the CEO about damaging property belonging to the elder, and the subject of what had happened in the Kingdom Hall car park and subsequent cover-up was not even mentioned. And I kind of wondered, at the time, but, maybe the elders kind of got to the CEO first before I did, before I got to tell him my story, but I wasn't really sure about that. I can't sort of verify that for sure. At the end of the meeting, I realised that my concerns were being ignored. It was their concerns that were being discussed, and only theirs. The CEO actually told me to apologise to the elder for damaging his property, and obviously no apology towards me, and in the Kingdom Hall auditorium, that's where he wanted me to apologise in front of other people as well. So what was the real reason why they locked the doors? They obviously don't really give a stuff about confidentiality unless it's in their favour, So I never had a chance to apologise because I was never given one. I was bullied out of the congregation before I got a chance. Now, one midweek meeting, I missed it because I think I was at home from work late, or I can't actually remember why it was, to be honest. And it might have been that I'd been out somewhere and sort of got back late, but I missed the meeting anyway. I don't think it was illness. And the following weekend meeting, sort of the worst thing happened. I was informed that I'd had a marking talk, which I'd obviously missed. But even though I never had a judicial or ever been reproved, I'd had this kind of marking talk. Now, interestingly, obviously, marking talks are no longer a thing. Apparently, they're considered not the right thing to do. They've changed their policy on that now. So it was an illegal marking talk. Then, in that case, it was, it should never have taken place. Now, interestingly, the public talk that day on the Sunday meeting was conducted by the electrician elder that I mentioned, and he did a full public talk based on me, and even included my sexual orientation in that talk. And you can imagine how I felt, can't you? It's embarrassing enough, and I wanted all this to be confidential, but here it was being broadcast over the entire Kingdom Hall, the entire audience. Now, it didn't mention my name, as we do it in marking talks generally, but he did make it obvious about, who he was discussing. So there was no doubt. But after the meeting had finished, I approached a sister to hand over a call, which I had, which was more sort of geared to her because she was an elderly woman, and she seemed uneasy and she didn't want to speak to me. And she said that she had to go and ask the elders if she could take the call off my hands. So obviously I was really heartbroken at the time, and I later found out that marking talks are normally given when a very serious, and only when a very serious matter has occurred, such as like maybe adultery or something. And the marking talk that I'd received was basically against their own policies. It was against their own rules. And even more so today, now that marking talks are no longer, they've been sort of debunked, they've been sort of scrapped now, haven't they? But I also found out that it was Watchtower policy not to do a public talk and a public prayer about a person. So this was just hate crime, really. At the end of the day, it was bullying. There's no two ways about that. And I went home that day, and I felt suicidal. I wanted to take my own life that day. I believe today that I was given a marking talk to sully my reputation before I sullied theirs, for the violation of confidentiality as well as for subsequent cover-up. Now, if this is God's organisation, if this is God's kingdom, then it literally lies to its adherents. So this was when I began to suffer from depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. I was literally traumatized by this point. And I was kind of living really with a kind of an anxiety that was in my chest just all day long, every day. It was relentless, So I stopped attending meetings again, and made meetings or makeshift meetings at home on my own, simply going through the material by myself. And I was afraid that at that particular time that it was going to get worse, and that I was going to get disfellowshipped, even though I never had any kind of judicial meeting. So I also kept up with my back calls and recording my field service, and I recorded it in my own kind of Microsoft Access database, which you could do then. I mean, obviously you can't do that today with the GDPR, but I did this for over 6 months. And when I began attending the meetings once again, the secretary suggested that I wasn't allowed to go out on field service because I hadn't reported for 6 months. So what I did was I ran out a printout from my Access database and placed a belated field service report for that duration. And I actually delivered it handheld to his house. Now, these attempts to stop me going out on field service was because the elder who had made the false accusation of damaging his wing mirror, and me approaching him about the other elder who violated confidentiality. He saw me doing my calls basically the day before in the area, and he didn't like it. So I then received a letter from a secretary stating that I couldn't go out on field service because I hadn't reported for over 6 months. But when I looked at the Kingdom Ministry, in which he quoted, it stated very clearly that you were no longer able to go out on service only if you had been inactive for 6 months. So not because you've not reported for 6 months, but because you've been inactive for 6 months. Well, I've never stopped my field service at that time. I'd only reported the figures late, but still he was very persistent that I stopped pioneering. So we soon announced it as well from the platform of the next meeting that I stopped pioneering, and I was never persuaded in any shape or form to keep going, which was, to be expected. So obviously I stopped going to meetings, but I continued fulfilling my obligations to preach, as I saw it then, by continuing with my call book on my own. And I even did some first call for a while in an area I knew wasn't worked often. However, my health was deteriorating, and it was largely untreated. The medication I was on was a stimulant, and it wasn't giving me, it was giving me insomnia, and it really wasn't working. So I was going through the weekly study material on my own every week to keep myself spiritually built up, as it were. I was still heavily indoctrinated at that time, but I never went to the meetings. And after some months had passed, I had been struggling to find meetings. Sort of Kingdom Ministries was hard to find as well, because obviously jw.org wasn't available then. I think it was watchtower.org, which was very basic, and it was, as much of the internet was in those days, it was very basic at that time. So I decided to check out a hall in Leeds, very close to the city centre. Leeds is about half an hour journey away from here. I first of all went to Rothwell Congregation just to check it out. However, I realised that owing to the location of the territory, the preaching territory, Hunslet Congregation was more ideal, who met in the same hall. So I decided to get established in this congregation instead. So I started attending meetings and a field service group once a week. Family worship had begun by that time, so I only had to travel to Leeds a couple of times a week, as I tied in field service with the midweek meeting on the same day. One night after the meeting, the congregation coordinator, I think it was still presiding overseer at that time, called me in the back room with another elder. I think he was the service overseer. I said I had to get the train, and he quite sternly said that he would give me a lift to the station. So there was no loving Christian personality in this conversation whatsoever. It was something that I was obviously used to by now. And I was then accused of point blank range of going to a congregation in Scotland, namely Elgin Congregation, and disassociating there. I was accused of having one or two other things as well that were trivial, and I can't really remember these now. But I was largely concerned about being accused of disassociating. So my last secretary from York Acomb had lied to my new congregation and told them that I had previously disassociated from a congregation in Scotland. And this, of course, is slander and a reason for disfellowshipping, apparently. Now, funny enough, I had never been to Scotland at that time, and I wasn't even sure whereabouts Elgin was. So I was really flabbergasted, shocked, obviously. And I mean, of course, I denied this completely. And I even wrote to Elgin Congregation to verify that I hadn't disassociated from this congregation, sort of proving my innocence. But although the letter had been opened, it was returned back to me as undelivered. And I showed it to the congregation coordinator in my new congregation, who quickly snatched it out of my hands and gave it to the congregation secretary. Now, I didn't realise it at the time, but they were adamant that I was not going to have this letter, which I'd written. However, and I don't know why I did it, but I made a copy of it today. And so I still have this letter. So anyway, I continued going to meetings. I attended field service, this, that and the other. But inside of me was a disease that was growing. It was more than just a feeling of sadness. It was an anxiety that accompanied me on a daily basis, non-stop. So granted, I was depressed, but in the end, it turned out to be post-traumatic stress disorder that had derived from my experiences in York Clifton and York Acomb congregations. They know about this, and they're covering this up as well today. It was first misdiagnosed as bipolar disorder, but in fact, it was an anxiety disorder. As this was building up, there had never been any justice really for what had been happening. I fell to pieces inside, and I disassociated in Leeds Hunslet as well, because it really got the better of me. I was completely disgusted about the behaviour of the elders in, by now, 3 congregations. And I was so disgusted about what had been happening that I emailed the secretary in Leeds Hunslet and disassociated by email. I was offered a chance to meet, but I declined, because by this time I had absolutely no trust in the body of elders at all, none of them. I mean, you wouldn't, would you, really? I mean, who would, after all that? And, you know, they would, having said that, they'd judge me for that, but I think it's pretty natural not to have trust for an organisation who lies and covers up constantly. I can never justify the elders' discrimination, their hate crime, the bullying, the false accusations. You know, it didn't marry up to the expectations that I had of the body of elders. You know, it was a scandal. There's no two ways about that. And it's a scandal that they're still covering up today. However, for spiritual association, in the end, I looked for JW friends on Facebook. I believed I'd found that, but they turned out to be apostates in disguise. Still, I had made online friendships, and I had no idea that they were apostates at all until one of them started promoting a get rich quick scheme, but I was strongly against. I remember feeling very sad that day. Anyway, my disassociation had upset some of these people owing to the reasons why I had disassociated. And in defence, one email recipient recognised the congregation secretary's name in an email distribution list. And this elder, who was the now service overseer in Hunslet, he fired back and disclosed to all recipients in block capital letters that I'd been disassociated.
Excuse me, Mark. Do you think you might owe me an apology for violating my confidentiality? Remember when you broadcast my disassociation by an email distribution list? Will you show repentance, or is that just for average publishers? Do you think that this is acceptable behaviour?
You know, obviously breaking the Data Protection Act into tiny pieces. Now, the GDPR hadn't come into effect yet. That didn't come into effect until 2018, I believe. So not being a recipient of the mailing, I didn't know for some time until eventually someone forwarded me the email saying that the elder had breached the Data Protection Act, and my confidentiality was yet again, violated. And so this is like the second major violation of, well, actually it was more than the second really, because there was a lot of violations of the confidentiality, but the main 3 for me really was obviously what had happened in the Kingdom Hall car park that day, the broadcast of my personal information in that public talk, and also preferredly in email, telling everybody that I was disassociated was like the three major events. But I think we counted about something like 17 in the end, 17 violations of confidentiality, and that's just what I know about. But for some time, because I was that heavily brainwashed by this organisation, despite everything that had happened, I was still a practicing witness, even though I was disassociated. So although in written form I was disassociated, I wasn't really. I was still practicing basically the belief system that that I was taught. So it took me a long time really to sort of deprogram. Now, for some time, I was sort of phasing in and out of my belief system, not really sort of understanding what was happening. I still believed that it was the truth, yet I couldn't justify what had happened to me at all. I was torn at that time, really, between my loyalty to God and also my disgust about how the elders were breaking the law and covering it up, especially how they hypocritically talk about Romans 13, verse 1, I think it is. So I occasionally visited Kingdom Halls elsewhere in Yorkshire, in the Yorkshire region, both in North Yorkshire and West Yorkshire, in order to collect materials for the ministry and obviously get some of the meetings. I got there by using the rail network, typically. I knew that these elders were still in their positions, so I wrote to Ridgeway, the Bethel in London. I threatened legal action. I wasn't intending any legal action, but I threatened them in order to make them listen, basically. And, that Bethel and Leeds Hunslet, of course, subsequently denied everything that had happened, even though it was in black and white and had all the evidence and everything. So in other words, they basically just lied. And what annoyed me the most was that if I was sat in a judicial meeting, which I can just mention that I've never ever had once sat in a judicial throughout this ordeal. But if I have, they've never actually said it was a judicial. But if I was ever sat in a judicial, I would be expected to sit there, tell the truth, and be repentant. However, for them, it was a different story. They just covered it up. However, the London Bethel that was in Ridgeway at that time, and all the elders, including the congregation coordinator at Leeds Hunslet, were denying the breaking of both the Data Protection Act as well as the Harassment Act. And for once taking the lead, of course, failed to be honest in a kind of judicial setting and thus failed to be repentant. So there was a strong sense of do not as I do, but do as I say. And this, of course, is hypocrisy and double standards on their part. So something that I'm now very used to, obviously, seeing in this organisation, because since then, since the internet has grown, basically, and particularly YouTube, as well as Reddit, I've seen sort of other stories where, people have had similar situations, and of course, CSA as well. So this comes as no surprise to me now when I look back. Well, I asked the legal department if they had changed their mind on their denial response, and they said no. So I knew by this time that they were corrupt. However, I still wanted to be reinstated. So I applied for reinstatement, and I didn't want to go back to Hunslet congregation for obvious reasons. So I wanted to go to Morley congregation, a Kingdom Hall on the outskirts of Leeds. So I got in contact with them. However, I was passed from pillar to post in the sense that Morley said I had to contact Hunslet congregation. And then when I contacted them, Hunslet said that I had to contact the congregation that I wanted to attend.
Message from unknown caller received at 15:52 hours on the 2nd of May.
Hello, Philip. This is Morley Gilderton congregation. Just acknowledging receipt of your letter. We are dealing with it, and we will be in touch with you later in due course. So just wait for our contact, please. Bye.
Welcome to the 3 voicemail service. You have 1 new voice message. New voice messages. Message from unknown caller received today at 2200 hours.
Hello, Philip. This is Morley Congregation following up on our message left on this number on Friday the 2nd of May. We've considered your application and are now informing you that the procedure is that you need to return to the congregation where you disfellowshipped yourself and apply to them for reinstatement, and they will make the final decision. Goodbye.
Welcome to the 3 voicemail service. You have 1 new voice message. New voice messages. Message from unknown caller received yesterday at 21:47 hours.
Hello, this is a message for Mr. Philip. My name's Ronnie Johnston. I'm an elder in the Leeds Hunslet congregation. With reference to your letter of May the 9th, 2014, we'd like to thank you for that. Glad to hear that you were considering returning to the congregation. Having decided to disassociate yourself in 2011, to return to being a member of our organisation requires some action by you. Whichever congregation you decide to attend will observe your return and progress over some time, and will consider any application you make for reinstatement thereafter. After they have had the opportunity to see you progress, you will therefore understand that it is not possible to apply for reinstatement if you are not attending a congregation when physically able to do so. Having heard your appeal, whatever congregation you attend will communicate as necessary with Hunslet congregation. We hope that you understand these steps clearly and that you feel able to follow them. And again, we hope that you're able to enjoy the benefits of associating back with the congregation by taking these steps. Thank you. Bye.
And this was a deliberate thwarting, a deliberate action to thwart my return to the organisation. So I then phoned Bethel to tell them I wasn't having any success in getting reinstated. So what did they do? They directed me to contact Hunslet congregation, and I told them that I'd already tried that, and the brother at Bethel was reluctant to help me any further. And with his reluctance to help, I then expressed concern that his actions was in effect murder, as he was thwarting my return. He hung up, and I believe to this day that I'd hit a nerve. So it took everything that I had to attend a midweek meeting each week in York Heworth congregation. I went for several weeks, but I was being ostracised and shunned at that time. Previously, I'd been using a phone hookup, which somebody gave me a number for, but it was in the United States, and I had to get up at 1 a.m. In the morning to get the midweek meeting. So there was one occasion when in Heworth congregation where a well-noted elder on the platform asked a question and nobody else put their hand up, but I had my hand up to comment and it was just completely ignored. So I was a bit disgusted at that time, and that was my last meeting. Now at that particular moment, he looked embarrassed, the elder on the platform who ignored my hand. And I saw him again on the ministry cart in town in York, and he looked really embarrassed then too. And I thought, well, good for you, mate, So I was literally on my own with my beliefs, really. It was ridiculous because I had the same beliefs as everybody else. And I was still wanting to practice being a JW. I wasn't apostate at that time, so it was ridiculous that they were shunning me for nothing, really. They were shunning me because obviously the elders had got them to shun me. So, I've got to say that I can't forgive them for that. Neither the elders or the people shunning me, really, because it affected me quite severely. And I don't think I could ever forgive them for that, ever. Never. But I was being ostracised because I was being considered literally as collateral damage, and that was a huge stab and twist in the heart. And obviously it still is today as well, when I think back to it. Well, the best of it was that I wasn't an apostate. They claimed that I was, in order to stop the truth coming out. It forced people to not engage in conversation with me in order to keep what had happened contained and silent, like I say, I still believed everything that was printed in the Bible at that time in the publications. I believed everything that they believed, but was considered as someone who didn't have Jehovah's favour, an apostate. I built up my hours and I was doing calls on my own. These people are absolute bastards in every sense. And at that particular time, I really, I felt really isolated and alone because obviously I couldn't associate with them. And I couldn't associate with the outside world either because it was instilled in me that it would have been the wrong thing to do. I could only associate really with my family who were at home and weren't in the truth. And so it was a very lonely time really for me, which contributed obviously to my illness as well. But when the cats were introduced, I would travel to Leeds and Sheffield and places like that in order to acquire magazines for calls by taking some from the cats when passing. So I'd go out on the ministry either the next day or sometimes maybe on the way home. Now on a Sunday when I knew all the witnesses were at their meetings, I would take a cart full of literature out and stand near the railway station in York on my own. Somebody gave me a cart, and this was kind of a part of my weekly pioneering schedule, really. Well, on my way out, I only had sort of minutes to catch a bus one evening when I was stopped by one of the elders, and I could see on their faces that they were scheming. You just know, don't you? And I also knew that they were not wanting to offer me any help because they never have. So I just said that I was in a rush for the bus and left. And I rolled my eyes on the way out. And I think they probably saw me do that. I contacted the elder, who's a blind fitter, through Facebook Messenger. And I told him why I had to leave. And suddenly, basically because I had 10 minutes to get to the bus stop for the last bus. I never once received a reply from him. And actually, I later wrote to the congregation overseer, congregation coordinator about the situation, quoted scriptures and everything, and I also never received a reply from him either. So obviously they were told not to reply, probably by Bethel, probably. So instead of being helped back into the congregation as they should do, I was just being ignored and effectively murdered in the sense of their beliefs. And this is how I felt about it then. But it was literally murder. They were all my murderers, basically, and still are today in that sense. But obviously these days I have no sort of religious belief at all. That died a long time ago, along with my trust for Watchtower, and even probably God's kingdom, I dare say. I got no trust in God's kingdom either. It's kind of just ruined it all for me, really. But in any case, a murder had taken place, because they vandalised my heart, basically. They murdered me on the inside, even if I'm kind of still physically alive. Well, I heard another victim of abuse recently describe how Watchtower kills the soul, and I recognised his words because it was exactly how I felt as well. So it was murder, even though you kind of like still stood here, you would they just murder you inside, and there's just no way of getting out that, It is murder because they obviously adversely affect your health, your life, your happiness, your joy, your career, your spirituality, everything, basically everything, and they wanted everything from you. And, I was just left with nothing really left but depression and suicidal thoughts at times. And I felt empty, desperate, sort of really for spiritual assistance. And if Jehovah's Witnesses were God's organisation on earth, which I don't think they are, but if they were, then they also murdered me spiritually. and physically too. Well, I've been disgusted for some time, actually, about the CSA cover-ups issue that's been going on with initially the Australian Royal Commission and then the Charity Commission investigations and how those at the top were dealing with it. More recently, there's been obviously the ICSA in the UK as well as the New Zealand Commission. So I decided to watch a BBC documentary entitled, which was a panorama documentary, Suffer the Little Children. And I found it on YouTube, so I decided to watch it. And the man who owns a support website, I can't remember his name now, I think it's like Bill Bowen or something, but so it's a website for abuse victims. He mentioned how by covering it up, the crime just hurts that one person, but sort of letting it out, sort of letting that information out, hurts the whole reputation of a religion. So it was after watching this that I realised that I was being silenced and that I wasn't the only person being silenced. Apparently there were thousands of candles that were lit in a special ritual, all victims of abuse who had been silenced and not told to go to the police. So although I hadn't been sexually abused or anything like that, but I'd been abused in many other ways, and there was no doubt about it. I was being silenced. I was a cover-up. And it was kind of a watchtower policy, not just a local one, which I kind of believed it was at the time. I believe it was all kind of a local thing really that was going on. But when I found out that it was the entire organisation, which was a shock to me, really, it really was. And that was the day that I stopped praying, and it was a point of no return, really. There was no turning back. So to be honest, I not only began to feel disgusted about being silenced and ultimately murdered by their standards, but also I felt very much lied to as well. For example, I'm not saying that the Bible is a lie, but I'm saying for me, it was like lies. For example, like the best life ever, that was a lie. More happiness doing God's will, that's a lie. Not being tempted beyond what you can bear, that's a lie. Having 100-fold more in this period of time, that was obviously a lie. Other scriptures like that really became just totally untrue for me because, when I married them up to my own experiences, they just proved to be completely false. All of it was false. So I made a couple of attempts to return to Jehovah, which by and large, repentant, disfellowshipped, inactive and disassociated ones are encouraged to do in the publications and videos, which are obviously available on jw.org. But me and thousands of other victims of abuse are excluded in that because we know about embarrassing scandals. We were victims of it. So we have a voice. So here I am sort of telling other people and other people who have also been victims, they're telling other people. So if we told them about these embarrassing scandals, if we told other members of the flock, it would potentially persuade them to leave their religion. And people are escaping through the back door as it is. So not that I'm persuading anybody to do this, it's entirely up to them what they believe. I'm not going to interfere, but this is what happened to me and this is what I'm relating. But it would also damage, obviously, the reputation of their religion, which I and others believe is being done right now by those covering things up. And those cover-ups are being exposed throughout the world, and now the Watchtower having to reap what they've sown. And the trouble is they're making other people pay for it as well. And we only have to look at the ARC, obviously New Zealand, UK Charity Commission, Finland and Norway, just for examples, to reveal how sinister this religion really is. So So why is it not being quashed really for its illegal and harmful activities? You think there'll be some entity out there that really could just put a complete end to that. Some kind of authority really that could just stop this organisation from doing the harm that it's doing. And it really kind of angers me, however, how the governing body are making their subjects pay money for compensation to victims when they are taken to court. It's simply theft. It's a scam. It should be the people as individuals who are causing this harm, really, that should be the ones. It should be coming out of their pocket, really, not the pockets of those who are donating. Well, when new powers came in with the GDPR, I decided to take advantage of the GDPR laws, knowing how reckless they were with my confidentiality. So I wrote to the Watchtower in Bethel, insisting that they delete my information as I withdrew my consent. Now, I mentioned it at least 3 times in all my correspondence that I wanted all my data deleted in all entities of their organisation. But when I finally got confirmation, they told me in writing that data from Bethel had been deleted, but not from the individual congregations. So they again breached the GDPR. So just this year, in 2024, I discovered that they hadn't deleted this information from Bethel. They had lied. And I assumed this already, to be honest, as I knew how unlawful and how unethical that they are. So they believe that they are kind of above the law of the land, because they think that because God sets all the laws, the laws of the land don't really apply to them, but really, the scriptures actually say in Romans 13 that they should be subjected to that, subject to those laws, but of course they don't, because it doesn't meet up with their agenda. Anyway, this wasn't the final time. Well, you wouldn't believe this if you hadn't witnessed this for yourself, but one of the elders who covered up the harassment and breaches of confidentiality in York Acomb congregation used his job as a postman to see if I still lived at the same address, because obviously we were do not call. And he did this by knocking on the door. There was absolutely no reason for him, in his profession as a postman, to knock on the door, as there was no large items, there was no parcels, there was nothing to sign for. So obviously this was a deliberate action that violated our privacy. Now, the funny thing was, my dad had just had a hernia operation, and I was only living there temporarily to walk the family dog and to do other tasks around the house, as my mother has mobility issues. So I put pen to paper, I made a complaint to the Royal Mail by email, and when the Royal Mail quizzed him, he actually lied about his intentions. Now, this particular elder, cum postman, told the Royal Mail that he knew we had a dog who liked to retrieve the mail, and he intentionally knocked on the door to give Alfie the post. Now, of course, as you and I know, dogs do not answer doors, and obviously that requires human intervention. Now, if a member of the household answers the door, there's no need for the dog to retrieve the post. So it shows you the kind of unscrupulous and dishonest sort of mentality that these particular elders really have, Additionally, the bedroom window was open, and I heard the person with him who was teaching him the ropes to warn him that we had a dog, and that he jumps up. So he pretended that he'd also pretended that he'd forgotten where we live, yet our names were on the post that he'd pushed through the door after knocking. So this was just another reason for me, of course, not to trust a single one of the elders. They all lie. They lie, and lie. They do it shamelessly as well. They have no remorse about lying. It's just this entire organisation that's claiming to be God's kingdom. Now, I received a response from the Watchtower about my complaint to them also, and as the elder postman's excuse didn't add up the first time, He then modified the excuse from giving the dog the post to inquiring about the dog. So this meant that his reason for knocking on the door was different in the Royal Mail response to that of a Watchtower response. Miss Elder used a 19-month-old Golden Labrador puppy as a means to get out of a sticky situation. So where was his repentance? Where was it? There wasn't any. Now, the reason why this response to my complaint from a Watchtower is in poor condition is because Alfie, the family dog, got hold of it after it had been pushed through the letterbox, proving why the family did not want the dog to retrieve a post in the first place. So it just goes to show, really. Watchtower, this devious organisation are literally claiming to be God's organisation on earth. And if they are God's organisation on earth, that means God's organisation is devious as well. It means that God's kingdom is devious. So there's no two ways about that. So I wasn't surprised, obviously, by this cover-up, because by this time I was used to it. So, and the best of it is that he'll be doing a public talk on a Sunday morning about being honest in all things. So just before I found out that it was a global policy to silence abuse victims, I already realised that I certainly could not live forever with the people who stole my life, who did all this underhanded stuff. It's one thing to live forever, but when you're living forever with people like that, it's going to be no paradise, is it? Absolutely not. You just be looking over your shoulder the entire time, wondering what's going on, what's going to happen next. So it'll be no paradise at all, as far as I'm concerned. To me, they were all Satanists. So I received a letter from Watchtower that contained so many lies that it would take literally hours to count, all to basically protect themselves legally. However, a few years ago, I got my own back. I uploaded lots of public talks to YouTube that I had stored as audio files, and from the times when I was trying to makeshift my own meetings, and I converted them into videos, basically, and uploaded them to YouTube. The channel had thousands of views, and the channel soon qualified to be monetized. And I earned, in the end, around about £16,000 doing so, before YouTube demonetized the channel. And that's when I took it off. I took it off YouTube once that had happened. You see, I knew taking them to court wasn't guaranteed to be successful, owing to their underhanded and deceitful, unscrupulous nature. So this was the best way, and it worked. Basically, it worked. So whenever I'm in another town and city and I see the cat, I approach the cat and the people on the cat, and have a conversation with them. When they're not knowing really that I'm disassociated as well as an apostate now. There was one couple in Sheffield even offered me a Bible study, and I accepted. I can, I've got the audio file for that if you want to listen to it. I did one study, then I blocked their number. But also this year, I was in Scarborough and I pretended to be an interested person in Peazone Park, on the north side of Scarborough. I even inquired about attending meetings. I said I was impressed with the app, and I had been through a lot of material on there that I wanted to attend meetings. So a study started with me and an elder from Scarborough South Bay congregation, and I went to my first meeting as well. He introduced me, not knowing that I'm a disassociated person and now an apostate, to many people in the Kingdom Hall, as one congregation was arriving and another congregation was leaving. So I was effectively being introduced to two congregations. So he even introduced me to his mother. I also attended two memorials the same evening and spoke to as many people as I possibly could. Now, ironically, this elder used to live in Leeds and knew people from Hunslet really well. So when I was in Leeds, I made sure that I told those people on the cat who I was having a study with, and they all knew him. which is kind of what I suspected. And I knew it was just a matter of time before he was going to find out that I'm disassociated and who I really was, and now I'm an apostate. So it took roughly about 4 weeks before it came to light, and I was trying desperately, basically, to get me something. So 4 weeks it took for it to come out, basically, and I got the bus home that day with the biggest smile on my face, because I knew I got justice. At last I'd got justice, the justice that I needed, basically, at this time, or all this time. So I've arrived in York, and I'm just about to make my way to the what is affably termed as the Kingdom Hell, and I'm a bit nervous, to say the least, but here we go. So I've come to Huntington. I'm going to go and take some footage of the my little stomping ground at just down Jockey Lane. Now I hate filming myself in public, so I've actually come somewhere very private, and for some reason I don't think I'm going to get very, very much in the way of disturbed here. Well, I don't think so anyway. So so I'm feeling a little bit nervous about going, because obviously, it's kind of like walking into the enemy's camp a little bit, and I feel, when you've got anxiety and depression, you sort of feel quite, obviously, like a kind of a crushing feeling in your chest sort of thing. You feel that like constantly all the time, and kind of never ceases. So it's sort of throwing yourself in the kind of like the enemy's camp is quite a brave thing to do, I think, when you've got anxiety, because obviously I'm getting tongue-tied now because I'm starting to feel quite anxious. So it's a bit silly, really, isn't it? But it's it's how the brain works. The brain is an organ, and like any other organ, it's prone to injury. So if there's anybody in particular, or a group of people in particular, that are very good at injuring people's brains, I would have said that this is, of course, Jehovah's Witnesses. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to stick my neck out and I'm going to take some footage. So I've come to approach my old hall at Hunslet Road, and to say that I'm feeling nervous is kind of like putting it mildly. So post-pandemic I've put this on because obviously I don't want to be recognised, and at the moment I feel really nervous, and I also feel that it's kind of like walking into the enemy's camp, as it were, and I mean, when I was forced to come to Leeds from York, obviously I had to get the train to Leeds every meeting time, every time I went out of service. So that was like £15 a time, return at that particular time. And also I would have to walk from Leeds station to the nearest hall, so potentially I didn't drive at that time. So anyway, I'm going to brave it, and I'm going to walk up to the hall and take a few shots, and probably take a few personal shots as well of myself being, with my hair stood on end. It's been a long time since I've seen my hair stood on end, I can assure you. Right, anyway, I'm going to go. I don't know if I'm looking forward to this. I'm sort of wondering why I'm actually doing this. Obviously, I know that the largest way to get my own back and to get revenge really is to tell my story as many times as possible and to as many people as I can. After all, it's my story that they have been desperate to cover up and to keep silent. But I have a voice, and I also have skills to produce a video on YouTube. I won't be lied to anymore, and I have the truth to tell, and I've got to tell to everybody, as many people as I possibly can. Hence why I'm doing this video. I like to see it as an opportunity to basically to spare other people from having the same misfortune that I did. So this has been my story. I have all the evidence to prove how disgusting this organisation really is, and that they have no right to be in society when they act the way that they do. I have a story to tell, and I'm going to shout it from the rooftops, and this is what I'm doing. And now I have, finally, at last, I have true justice, something worth celebrating.